Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to a new series on the Workology podcast that we are kicking off that focuses on the future of work. This series is in collaboration with the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, or PEAT. You can learn more about PEAT at peatworks.org. In 2016, the Department of Labor reported the rate of unemployment for those with disability was 10.5%. This talent pool remains largely untapped and presents a great opportunity for businesses who are looking for employees to fill their open roles within their organization. The question is, how do companies find, engage, and retain this untapped talent market? Today, I'm joined with Pat Romzak. He is the executive consultant with Project Life Changer at Cisco. Pat, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Jessica, I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. So give listeners some insights into who you are and how you came to Cisco and Project Life Changer.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for allowing me to be part of this. It's interesting, my background. This wasn't part of my job. I led cloud strategy for Cisco. I left Cisco in March of this year. I retired, actually. My day job was in the area of sales leadership, executive roles at Cisco over the last 16 years, but I'm a special needs dad. And I became aware of the terrible statistics around employment of people with disabilities that you mentioned earlier. And I was I guess I challenged myself to do something about it. So I started this project, Life Change, a couple of years ago at Cisco, sort of outside my day job as a volunteer leader. And it's taken on a bit of a life of its own. And then subsequently to my retirement in March, Cisco asked me to come back and continue to lead this project as a consultant. So that's what I've been doing most recently. But it's an area of great interest and passion for me.
Well, walk us through what Project Life Changer is so that we kind of can put everything together.
Okay, great. Yeah, Project Life Changer, we started a couple years ago, and it was myself and a small group of folks that endeavored to make a difference in employment of people with disabilities. And Cisco, as a technology company, is the leading provider of, for example, collaboration solutions globally. We use it every day. I'm working out of my home office. I have the opportunity to work anywhere, anytime. And we had this notion that why couldn't we leverage technology to try to make a difference in employment for people with disabilities? A lot of money's been spent over a long period of time, as you know, Jessica, and it really hasn't had a huge impact. So what we were trying to do is make a difference leveraging technology. And we had this idea that work is something you do, not a place that you go. And our original concept was to use collaboration solutions technology to allow people with disabilities to work in a virtual kind of work environment, work from home, to eliminate some of the barriers to employment. It's really grown quite a bit since those early days. It's still fundamentally part of what we're trying to do with Life Changer, but we've gone well beyond just a technology-based solution into embedding it into our process and culture and making part of what we do at Cisco.
So one of the things I liked about Project Life Changer and I thought was interesting is that it isn't just limited to a single disability. Like, say, Project Life Changer isn't an autism hiring or Down syndrome hiring specific disability program for Cisco. Why did you guys decide to go that direction?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of the evolution of this. So remember, it was a volunteer project that I started, and as time went on, we had more and more success. We did a pilot in San Jose, California, actually in the U.S., and that's where our headquarters are. And we hired some people, and what we found was we learned a lot in the process, but what we found was there was a lot of global opportunity here. So then we moved last year into pilots. We did one in San Jose, continued the pilot in San Jose with some nonprofits in the state of California there. But we also did pilots in Bangalore, India, where we hire a lot of people, Brussels, Belgium, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and a couple of other smaller locations. These are large employment centers where Cisco hires a lot of people. And we endeavored to think, could we make a difference not only in the US, but in some of these other markets? And based on the success that we had in those places, we then expanded the program to really be global in nature and focusing across geographies and disabilities. You asked the question about disabilities. Some programs that some companies have are focused on sort of one disability. What we found is great success across the entire disability spectrum. We've hired people. When we did one of the pilots we did in Bangalore, we hired a large group of people that were visually impaired. They were blind. Well, you think about how hard is it to be an engineer at Cisco in our technical center in Bangalore, India, when you're blind. And what we found is that these people's productivity was so high, despite their visual impairment, that it led us to start looking in other areas as well. So we've now hired across really the disability spectrum, about 30% of the people we've hired have been visually impaired, about 40% mobility impaired. Remember, we started, Jessica, with this notion of, location independent, virtual employment, flexible employment environment where people could work in kind of a flexible work environment. So mobility impairment, about 40% of the people. We've hired a number of people with autism as well. Of course, we've been hiring people with autism for a long time in the tech industry. About 20% of the people we've hired have been people with autism. And then the remaining 10% are a variety of other disabilities, including hearing impaired and other things. But it has been across the spectrum. And what we've tried to do is not be prescriptive to say we're only going to hire certain types of people and we're only going to hire certain types of people in certain locations. We tried to focus on where we had the greatest opportunity for success, which typically were in these large employment centers. And then what we tried to do is to recruit the best candidates in those locations for roles, and then we accommodated them in the roles. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so you're saying that you have focused in really 3 target areas as far as geographic. So San Jose, Bangalore, and Brussels. How many people have you hired throughout the entire sort of existence of the Life Changer program?
So we've hired, well, first of all, let me talk about location. So that's where we did pilots, but we've now moved into what we're calling kind of a systemization, or full integration mode at Cisco. So we're really embedding this whole idea of Life Changer and hiring people with disabilities as a foundational, fundamental strategy in terms of what we're trying to do around talent as a company. So it's gone beyond those locations. Those were the locations where we did pilots. Where we hire most of the people are in these large employment centers. So Bangalore, India, we've hired quite a few people. We've hired people in Brussels. We've hired people in Sao Paulo. We've hired people in San Jose, Raleigh, North Carolina, Krakow, Poland. Most large companies, tech companies especially, typically have these sort of locations where they're hiring a lot of people. And that's where we've tried to focus our energy, where we had large critical mass of candidates, employees, and new hires. Now, in terms of your point about how many we've now hired about 100 people prescriptively, meaning that we had identified opportunities, requisitions, positions that we intentionally recruited people into with disabilities. We have about another 100, a little more than that we've actually got committed over the next year or so that we're hiring into, and we've added a couple of other locations, including some other locations in Europe, some other locations in Asia. We have a program that we're launching in Australia and in China. So it's gone well beyond those original locations, but it is typically focused on large, sort of employment centers. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get into a little bit more about the recruiting and why we've sort of focused there.
It's very impressive, especially when you're looking at this from a global scale. My question to you is, how is recruiting in these different markets for people specifically with disabilities different?
Yeah, it's very different. Typically, our recruiting strategy, we call it talent acquisition. Our talent acquisition strategy focuses on 3 things. First of all, we leverage and we've developed partnerships with non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, government groups, other advocacy groups in these locations. So we typically, I'll use as an example, India. We recruited a lot of people in India. Well, what we did was we worked with some nonprofits in India that had a lot of marketplace awareness and had access to the talent pool in that location. So we use them to source candidates. That's number 1. Number 2, we focus on universities that are focused on the population of people with disabilities. In some locations, there are universities that are really deeply focused on people with disabilities, so we tend to target them. The US, for example, we've got a short list of universities in the US that we're working with to specifically recruit people with disabilities. The third thing we've done on the talent side, Jessica, is a little different and maybe different from what a lot of companies are doing. We're building our own talent pool as well. What do I mean by that? Well, we had a challenge in India where we were hiring so many people that we were having trouble finding enough candidates that had the background we wanted. Now, these were technical, entry-level technical jobs in our technical service center. So we were looking for people with specific types of capabilities and background, and we weren't finding enough of them. So what we decided to do was to build our own talent pool. So we developed a program, we call it the Life Changer Talent Incubation Program. Essentially what we do is we recruit people in with disabilities that have the character traits we're looking for, that have the drive and the commitment and the capabilities to do these types of roles. And then we put them through an accelerated and aggressive training program, an apprenticeship program to move them into a job. So we're essentially building our own supply chain of talent. That's the third way that we're recruiting talent. And depending on the market, we may focus on one or two of those strategies versus all three, but we are employing all three of those strategies globally to bring people on board.
I like the idea of apprenticeship program. I think that's really creative and something that I think a lot of our listeners maybe have heard about or read about, but haven't really considered for themselves.
It has made a huge difference for us because what we do then is we bring people in that have the right character traits. We're looking for people that have technical aptitude, but have some of the other characteristics we're looking for. We can give them the technical background. We can give them the experience through an apprenticeship. What we can't do is necessarily change their character per se, right? So we look for people with character traits. We provide them the education, the technical background through our talent incubation program, leveraging the Cisco Network Academy curriculum, by the way. And then what we do is use a sort of an apprenticeship program to sort of orient them in the role, to understand what's involved in the role and how that might all work. So that's really helped us. And now we're actually using universities to recruit people into this sort of academy apprenticeship program. So it's been very, very effective for us. And I know a lot of tech companies I've talked to, Jessica, have the same challenge. Where do I find enough talent? You know, you've got the employers that'll say, I can't find people that have the skills I need. And then you have the candidates that say, nobody wants to hire me. And the reality of it is there's a big, broad pool of talent here that are capable of doing these kinds of roles that may not have just the exact right experience or didn't go to the right university or didn't have the right work experience. Well, if they've got the capabilities and you put them through training and apprenticeship programs, they can grow into the job and be some of your absolutely best employees.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the different tools and technologies you have used as part of the Life Changer program?
Yeah, so we started out using collaboration solutions, as I said, voice, video, live voice, HD video, collaboration tools that we use fundamentally across Cisco. And these are things that we actually sell. And these are things that many of our customers use from Cisco. So that was sort of a cornerstone. But what we added to that was the accommodations technology necessary for the individual, because every individual is a little different. So we would take our collaboration platform, we would integrate it with the right levels of accessibility and accommodations to satisfy and support the individual candidate. And then we provided, other tools to help with the onboarding process, whether it was training programs like we talked about earlier, or it's, manager training and tools and those types of things. But from a technology point of view, it's found fundamentally our collaboration solutions coupled with accommodation accessibility technology.
Let's take a bit of a reset. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast in partnership with PEAT. Today we are talking about the Inclusive Apprentice Program at Cisco with Pat Romzak. You can connect with Pat on Twitter at PRomzak, PROMZEK.
The Workology Podcast Future of Work series is supported by PEAT, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. PEAT's initiative is to foster collaboration and action around accessible technology in the workplace. PEAT is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, ODEP. Learn more about PEAT at peatworks.org. That's PEATWORKS.org.
All right, let's kind of get back to things a little bit. You've talked about your program in depth, and I wondered what are some of the ways that maybe you've had to adjust your candidate interview and selection process. You talked about processes a little bit, but maybe kind of talk a little bit more about those process changes that you might have made.
What we found fundamentally, Jessica, is when we first started on this pilot, we found initially that we weren't hiring very many people, even though we were trying to. And as we really sort of did a pretty thorough evaluation of what was happening, why was this happening, why were we struggling to get more people through the talent recruiting pipeline, what we found is that while the pool of people with disabilities is vast, it's a huge pool. We were working in a partnership with the state of California. They had hundreds of thousands of candidates in their talent pool that they were providing to us because they were working with us in partnership. What we found is that oftentimes the candidates either wouldn't go to the best top school because of their disability. Maybe they didn't finish in the top of their class in high school. They're very intelligent and capable, but maybe didn't finish the top of their class. Maybe they didn't go to Stanford or MIT or Harvard or Michigan. Maybe they went to a community college. Maybe they went to a different kind of university. So typically what we would see is their background might not be an indicator of their capabilities. So in a traditional recruiting process where, we get 100 candidates for every open requisition at Cisco or more, some jobs we have thousands of candidates, you're screening candidates based on their resumes. Well, what you'd find with a lot of people with disabilities is they don't self-declare and say, hey, I have a disability and that's why I didn't finish in the top of my class. But on paper, they sort of look like candidates that maybe went to a secondary school, maybe weren't in the top of their class, maybe didn't have the exact right background and experience. So what we did was we did a couple of things. First of all, we turned the process upside down. Instead of looking at candidates and then trying to fit them into jobs, we looked at jobs and then went to look for candidates. So we recognized there were certain types of roles that were the best opportunity for success for someone with a disability. Typically, they're roles that are early in kind of career roles where they can grow in the company, typically in a role that doesn't require extensive travel. So it might be a job that is more of a desk job or a virtual job they could do from home. We were looking for roles in specific organizations where it seemed like it was a really good fit with a talent pool. So we did this sort of idea of, I call it supply driven by demand. So we would start with a job, which we defined as the demand for the person, the talent, and then we would build a supply to match the demand. When we started doing that, we immediately started having more success. And then what followed from that, Jessica, was this idea of this talent incubation program. So as we started having more and more success, we started realizing that there were a lot of candidates that maybe just didn't have the right background, didn't have the right experience, didn't have the right work experience, that we could build them up because they were capable, they were highly capable. We could build them up using these incubation programs as a way to give them the experience and the background to make them successful in the job. So those were a couple of different ways that we really altered our processes, and we're doing that today. And now we're using these strategies, really across the whole company.
I find this fascinating, and I think that much needed, right? And that you guys have recognized this and that you've made adjustments because you are right. There are so many individuals with disabilities that don't self-declare. And so we are missing opportunities to engage those people because they don't fit into sort of that perfect little profile that we've created for those positions.
That's exactly right. The other thing, and maybe just to add to that, you asked how we changed the process. The other thing we do is now we're looking differently. So we're looking for people with specific capabilities, character traits, that if they don't have the right background, they don't have the right degree from the right school or the right work experience, we'll put them through an incubation program. And when we bring them in the incubation program, we're looking for people with certain character traits. Technical aptitude, yes, but frankly, not as much technical experience, more technical aptitude. We're looking for character traits. So we'll do things like video interviews versus just looking only at a resume, and references and feedback we get from nonprofits or universities. So it's changed the way we look at the candidate pool.
Let's talk a little bit about how Cisco is measuring success with this program. what kind of metrics or measurements or goals do you have, or does Cisco have, that will say, look, this life changer program is successful?
There's one measure of success: impact. I mean, it's easy to say, I guess, but we're, at the top line, sort of, we're looking at how many people are we hiring? How are we changing the mix of our workforce? But there's a lot more we look at along the way. So I'll give you an example. We measure everything at Cisco. So many roles that we have, we have very clear view of sort of people's contribution. Everybody at Cisco is pretty accountable. That's the culture of the company. So some of the people that we've hired, I'll use as an example. So we did this pilot in India. Well, we hired people into this technical service, role, entry-level roles, that they were working with our customers as kind of entry-level technical service representatives. What we ended up recruiting quite a number of, started out with a handful of folks, and I told you earlier that many of them were visually impaired. So we had a group of 34 people, like 20 of them ultimately were visually impaired. We had so much success that we hired more and more and more of them. But what we were able to do is benchmark their productivity. So while, we're happy we hired these people, we're really focusing on how are they contributing to the success of their team and of the company. And what we found was pretty amazing. And we've got great benchmark statistics now that have helped us drive further acceleration of the program, because what we found is the people that we hired in these roles were more productive than their coworkers who didn't have a disability. And in fact, we measured things like service closure rate, service request closure rate, team productivity, error rates, things like that. And what we found is, for the people that we hired under this program that were visually impaired, again, think of them as an engineer on the phone with a customer helping them solve a technical problem, and they're visually impaired, they're blind, they're using a screen reader to read a computer screen. What we found is that their service request closure rate went for the group from 60% to 85%. We were closing issues faster. The productivity of the group went up 250%. They were driving more successful closure of technical issues, and we were getting higher customer satisfaction. At the same time, the error rates went down. So, that's how we were measuring the success of those individual people. And that success then led us to hire even more folks, because what happened was our business leaders recognized, not only is this good for people, it's good for society, it's great for our workforce and our culture, but it's good for our business too. These folks are adding and incrementally driving up productivity of the team. So it wasn't a case of just a social justice, kind of a social impact strategy. It became really fundamental to our business strategy and talent strategy.
I love that you guys are focused on these areas, like the productivity and the closure rate and the error rate, because it's not just turnover or retention, it's other impacts directly to the business that senior leadership is looking at and is important to the success of your growing company.
Yeah, and Jessica, I would just add, I've had a number of companies that have reached out to us and kind of want to understand a little bit more about what we're doing and what we've learned. And many companies are really focused on this topic, but they struggle trying to move it through the organization because they really don't have a very strong business case. The business case is more of it's the right thing to do kind of strategy, versus I can show you that this will have a positive impact on the company bottom line. What we have is, the ability to demonstrate that this has a positive impact on the company bottom line. So yes, it's the right thing to do. Yes, it's great for people. Yes, it's great for society and for our customers, but it's also great for our business. And the combination of all of those things has really led us to have even greater success, right? It's sort of a success breeds success kind of model.
So you've sort of answered my next question, which I like the idea of making the business case, because that is a great way to think about how to create a program like this at another organization. But what advice do you have for somebody who might be just getting started or is thinking about putting together a pilot program like Cisco's?
Well, I would leave you with a few things. So, we've been quite introspective, as I said earlier. We did pilots and then we scale. And so we're trying to learn and continuously improve. Well, along the way, we've learned quite a few things. And I would say that it falls into two categories. First is, what are the critical success factors to have a successful program? And then secondarily, I've also been asked quite a number of times, what are the barriers? There's barriers. What are the barriers? So from a critical success factor standpoint, I would tell you that it's sort of a building blocks approach. It's not a one size fits all. It's not just one thing. Like some companies I've talked to, there'll be like a sort of a senior level mandate, well, we're going to hire X number of people and, go forth and prosper, sort of a strategy. What we learned was, yes, executive sponsorship was important, but so is operational support. And meaning we had executive sponsors that were saying, yes, we're going to hire these people. This is part of our talent strategy. But we also had to develop sort of the working operational leadership to drive the process change and the awareness at the hiring manager level. You need both. It's got to be both top down and bottom up is what I would tell you. And there's ways to do that, which I'd be happy to share with folks if they're interested, or at least what we did. Secondly, target on the best opportunities. What we found to be successful is don't focus across the entire company. I mean, we have 70,000 employees. We have thousands of open requisitions at any point in time. How do you drive change in that kind of a high volume recruiting environment? What we found to be successful, start with a few roles in locations that we knew we could be successful with. And rather than starting with talent and bringing them in and having them apply for a bunch of jobs, we started with the roles themselves. And we built the talent supply to match that demand. We got commitments from our business leaders to target people with disabilities for certain types of roles. Then we built a supply of talent to match the demand. We build a business case. Really important to have a business case because some folks in the organization are really inspired by the social impact, the people impact, why it's good for society and good for human beings. Other people are driven by business impact or other factors. So having a business case is really important. It really makes a big difference to focus on roles in organizations and leaders where you can establish talent targets and commitments and strategies. Not trying to just sort of recruit everybody and everywhere. It's really focusing more where we can be successful and having the right levels of sponsorship in those organizations to be successful. And then externally building the partnerships with nonprofits, NGOs, universities to build the supply of talent. And then last but not least, it's all about communications, making people aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, why it's good for the company, what the business case is. And then at a more tactical level, even just training and awareness for hiring managers so they know how to recruit and how to retain people with disabilities as part of their workforce. So it's a combination of things. And I'll be happy to share with you, Jessica, I've got a slide that kind of shows some of this that I'd be happy to share if you want to make it available to the audience.
Absolutely. I think what we'll do is we'll embed your PowerPoint presentation into the transcript over on workology.com on Pat's podcast. So if you just go to the workology.com website, click on podcast, we'll have Pat's information and all his resources there for you to be able to take a look and kind of get your thinking caps on to plan your own program.
The other thing I would add for the audience is we found it's a complex issue. There's a reason why the employment of people with disabilities has been a challenge for a long time. A lot of money's been spent, really, hasn't made a huge impact. And what we recognized was that there were a number of challenges that were impeding our ability to be successful. Certainly there's misconceptions. It's sort of peeling an onion. A lot of times the first thing you see is the misconception that a hiring manager or an executive might think, well, these folks, I'm not really sure can they do the job, because they know of a neighbor, a friend, a nephew, a niece that had a severe disability or a developmental disability, and they're sort of thinking in their own mind, I'm not really sure if they can do these kinds of roles. So there's these misconceptions. The way you overcome those is with education and awareness. You do have issues, barriers associated with access, meaning people can't physically get to work. I mean, if you can't drive, how do you get to work every day if you live in, some of these locations where transportation can be a real challenge in the U.S. and outside the U.S.? So, having a virtual or a flexible employment model, allowing people to work in a flexible work environment and allow them to work virtually allows a lot more people to participate in the workforce than otherwise could. there's a lot of process barriers, as I said earlier. We recognize that, and we did a lot of process redesign to recognize and try to enable accelerated employment. There clearly is bias among some people, and you may call it misconceptions. Other people may call it bias. The business case is really important because it helps people understand we're not just doing this only because we feel like it's good for people. That's part of it for sure, but it's not the only reason. We're actually doing this as well because it's really good for our business. And then last but not least, one of the barriers is, as I talked earlier, this notion that some of the candidates are highly capable but don't have the exact work experience or education levels that we would look for. And as a result, what we're trying to do is to build a supply chain of talent using training and apprenticeship programs to bring people who are capable and give them the employable skills to make them successful at Cisco and beyond.
Well, Pat, I thank you so much for joining us. And I know that we're going to have lots of questions and comments, and people are going to know how to connect with you. So where can people go to learn more about you and what Cisco is doing here?
We are in the process of posting a lot of some material on our external website. A lot of it's not all there quite yet. It's sort of in process. So you'll find it in our Office of Inclusion and Collaboration. You'll find materials around Life Changer. It's being sponsored by Sherry Slade, our Chief Diversity Officer, and her team. But if you have questions, you can get questions answered directly by sending an email to a special email alias we have that we use. It's lifechanger, one word, lifechanger@cisco.com. You can contact me, my Twitter address, which is @promzek, or my email address, which is promzek@yahoo.com, or promzek@cisco.com, same email address, Cisco versus Yahoo. So feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to know more. We'd be happy to share, what we're doing. And we don't think, I would tell you, Jessica, that while we're really happy with the success we've had, we don't think we've got everything figured out here. And we learn as well from other folks. So it's always good to collaborate. We do think there's a significant opportunity, though, to enhance our brand, our workforce, and our business. It does require extensive focus and execution, both top down and bottom up. Focusing and doing it in the right way makes a big difference for us, but we think the opportunities are enormous. And, Cisco's vision, it goes back to our founding, 30 years ago, was change the way the world works, lives, plays, and learns. We can't think of a better embodiment of our vision than this project. And that's what's helped us really create a lot of momentum, and we get a lot of support internally. So I hope you found it useful, hope the audience found it useful, and we'd be happy to share what we're doing and as well learn from other folks as well, to hopefully make a difference in the world and transform the lives of people with disabilities at the end of the day.
It's conversations like these that provide insights into the larger organizational changes that need to happen for an organization to embrace an inclusive hiring program, as we've seen from Pat and his work at Cisco. It's not simply creating a new talent funnel and candidate-specific marketing programs. Companies have to flex their entire interview selection, onboarding, and training program to truly make an inclusive workplace. This, combined with Cisco and Pat's global recruiting efforts, are truly inspiring. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes.
To find out more about Life Changer at Cisco, you can connect with Pat on Twitter @promzek, that's PROMZEK, on LinkedIn, Patrick Romzek, on the Cisco website for inclusion and collaboration, or by emailing a special alias Cisco setup, lifechanger@cisco.com. Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill, provided by TotalPicture.com.